welcome, Beth.
Thank you.
Great to be here. And Warren, thank you. Thank you for convening us. And thank you to all of you for showing up today. Sometimes I talk about that we're not just in Boston, but of Boston. And the fact that you guys would take the time to connect and share a meal and learn together from this great CEO is a really wonderful thing and an important part of our business community. So thank you for showing up. And, as part of being of Boston, one of the things that we like to call ourselves as Boston, and I think we might be the only people who call ourselves that, is the hub, which is short for the hub of the universe. And we say that because all great things somehow can be traced back to Boston, like all the Nobel Prize winners, most of them went to school here, and we have a great business, a great scientist, a great innovation that comes here, as well as our sports teams. And just like that, one of the greatest leaders in the world, one of the 50 greatest leaders of the world, Beth, obviously can also trace a connection to Boston in that she lived here. And so clearly, that's a big source of your inspiration and your success.
That's right. I had quite some fun when I was there because I was like 23, right out of college, had about a nickel in my pocket. That time of your life where you're exploring, doing things you shouldn't do that you don't tell your parents.
So when you lived here when you were 23, you lived in East Boston, right?
I worked in East Boston. I was working for Mobil Oil at the time. I lived in the Back Bay, Fenway area. And then at one point, I was working the night shift, night manufacturing, so I lived in New Hampshire. And it was just joyously fun. I have many fond memories. In fact, the godfather of my sons, I met when I was here in Boston. He now obviously is still in my life, in their life, and I just have so many fond memories. Of all the places I've lived, I think that you end up having the joy of the remembrance of that location and tied to the people that you meet and met. And I certainly met so many wonderful people, so many impressive folks here. And like I say, at one of those pivotal times in your life when you're just out of college, you're learning who you are as an adult, as an independent person, and go to the Cape. It's good times.
Right. So now that I've given you that softball to praise us in the room, we're going to switch cities and go to Sioux City, which is where you're born. And you talk a lot about your family, and you had this sort of big dynamic family. Tell us a little bit about your origin story.
Yeah, I'm from Sioux City, Iowa. We like to call that Superland. We grew up in a time when Fred Grandy from the Love Boat was our congressman. We had a lot of pride. Good times. But it was a wonderful, very noisy, busy childhood. I have 7 siblings. I'm number 5 of 8, 4 brothers, 3 sisters, and I'm number 5. And my mom had me, she's still with us. She's 86. She's very healthy, cognitively terrific. She teaches, she's a powerhouse. And so it was busy, and the first 5 of us, so I'm number 5, she had me when she was 27 going through nurses training. She was an RN. And so I know, and I look at it, my learning in life as if your mother has had 8 and you've had 3, she's not interested in your problems. Not so much, but it was just that kind of life. Now, there was a large family, Catholic family, went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school. My father was a truck driver. My mother became a nurse, and we were very much a working class family with, living kind of paycheck to paycheck in that old simulated wood paneling station wagon. You're bouncing around, nobody's wearing a seatbelt. My dad's smoking a cigarette. It was good times again. And, the stuff that would probably get you pulled over these days. But it was no different than any other family in my neighborhood. So you didn't feel like you had less than. You felt like you were so lucky. You would go to school, you would go to church. We didn't have a lot of money for things. I always say, geez, were my brothers hand-me-downs till I was, old enough to work and get my own clothes. And yet I reflect back on that and think of how fortunate I was. Education was always a priority in our family. We were taught we had to work for what we wanted because there was not going to be anything to necessarily give to us. My siblings and I are still very close. We're very close to my mother. who was a nurse, and then she went off, got her master's, became a therapist, and then she became a minister. And she would say, I worked on their bodies, their minds, and now their spirits. And so she's been probably the most foundational person in my life, is somebody I admire greatly for her resilience and her optimism under challenging environments, and she taught me much.
Your mom sounds like a really remarkable woman, not alone, only for the fact that she had 8 children, but just for all of the values that she instilled in you. So I want to, you've had, Warren referenced that you had worked in 6 different industries. You had a very nonlinear career to get you to the top of Land O'Lakes. So walk us through a little bit, aside from your obviously very important stay in Boston, about where your career took you. Foundational.
It was a launching pad. Okay, Boston, proud. I started out of undergrad. I worked for Mobil Oil, and they had a training program. And I remember I got in my little Honda CRX, and I motated out to Los Angeles. Now, you're from Iowa, and what you're listening to is Paul Harvey and the crop report in the morning. And so you get to Los Angeles, and I'm like, there's crime. There's crime in this big city. And so I was there, and my background, and the reason I was able to transition from one industry to the next and go to multiple companies is because my background is really on the operating side of businesses. I was in manufacturing, I was in supply chain. And so I went through a training program with Mobil, and then moved to Boston. That was my first assignment out of undergrad. So I was with Mobil for 10 years, and moved multiple times and was promoted a number of times. And I found out a lot about myself in this career journey. What I realized there, I got my master's. I was going to school to do that, and came out and got my master's in finance, and got a position on the trading floor. That's considered very sexy in that industry. Oh, you're on the trading floor, blah, blah, blah. We're trading barrels. This is good. But I found out I didn't really like that. And the reason is that it wasn't people intensive. I like the mess of the human condition. I like the implications and the impact and the ability to know somebody's family, somebody's challenges, their frustrations, and that operating platform where I would have 100 guys, or it was terrific for me. I thought, well, that's my dad, that's my uncle. These are my folks. They deserve an optimistic clarity as to what success looks like for them on this shop floor today. And this, I paid for college by cleaning toilets. That's the way I worked my way through college, because in my family you had to work to go put yourself through college. So that career start, I learned very much about myself, what I enjoyed. I then went into, where did I go next? I went to Persico, which is a supply chain manager for McDonald's. I was there briefly, but it was a small company, probably too small for my age and what I wanted to achieve. Then I went to Pepsi, went into consumer goods, was with them for 3 years. And then I made a complete U-turn and went into publishing. And I became the COO, or the head of operations for Scholastic, the children's book publisher. And folks say, well, why did you do that? Well, what happened was I met the CEO, who he's since passed, Dick Robinson. And he talked about the mission of literacy and children. And I thought, that's important work, literacy and children, and I would have some energy for that. And that's, I think, a second learning for me in my life about what energizes me. One was, again, people. 2 is businesses that do things that are important, in my mind, important. And so I was there for 7 or 8 years, and then went to another publisher, Hachette. Then I went to a chemicals company, because I wanted to have much more international exposure. And so I worked around the world, built factories around the world, name it, I probably was there. And then I got a call for Land O'Lakes. Would I come in and talk to them about running their supply chain? Now, I was in New York City at the time. My wife was the CEO of a hedge fund at the time. And we were New Yorkers. We had 3 children. And I was like, we're New Yorkers. We're not going back to the Midwest. She's from Peoria. And I'm from Sioux City. And, but I was like, okay, well, I'll go in and talk to him. But I literally, as I was landing in Minnesota, I thought, I'm not moving to Minnesota. But here I am, Minnesota. And what I heard there was the mission of feeding a growing world population, set to go to 9.5 to 10 billion by 2050. And we have to double food production in that time frame with less arable land, less available water. And so I thought that was important. And then I thought the construct of the cooperative model, ownership is the farmers and local rural retailers. I thought that was really interesting and important. So again, that work, that importance of that work, the intimacy of that model, of knowing these families. 95+% of farms are still owned by families. They are family owned. And so I think of this as that importance right near in of making sure that we have success so they have success, so that they can continue to operate and hold their land and hold their way of life. And so I made that transition, went in as the chief supply chain officer, then started picking up the different business portfolio, different types of businesses that are part of the Land O'Lakes enterprise, and then was named COO and then named CEO 5 years ago.
So I think that when people hear of Land O'Lakes, they think of the butter that's on your table, because Warren doesn't miss any details. And
I have gone to places they didn't have our butter on. The talk was not as entertaining.
But I think people, when I say people, I mean me, didn't really appreciate how enormous of and complex of an organization Land O'Lakes is. And to start with, also your impact just for scale, that when you joined Land O'Lakes, the revenue was $13 billion a year. And in the 5 years, she's increased it to nearly 20 billion of revenue, just to give an idea. So can you walk us through the 4 different businesses?
So Land O'Lakes, like you say, everybody says, I love your butter. And I'm like, this baking season, let's get busy with it. We make cheese too, but we also own Vermont Creamery. And so there's a dairy part of our portfolio, of which most people are familiar. And that's less than a third, actually, of the business. The business actually starts with a grower. So our Winfield Technologies business, our Winfield business is, think of it as the supply part of the cooperative. I'm going to give you seed, crop protection, fertilizer, et cetera. You're the farmer. We're going to provide this information. But we also have the use of technology that is fairly significant in agriculture, but most people are unfamiliar. That we use satellite technology. We have big data. We have applied research plots. We have a research center. So there's that, and that's part of the biggest part of the business. It's about 8 to 9 billion of the business. And then we have Purina Animal Nutrition. We feed large animals. We feed all the Olympic horses. We feed the zoo animals. So we go from there, and then we have Truterra, our insights business that we're working with. It's relatively new. It's on sustainable production. Working against climate impacts, the resiliency of agriculture and the food supply, which I have tremendous concern, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, about the fragility of the food supply, of which most people are unfamiliar, but it should be concerning to all of us.
So it's a fascinating group of 4 different really business lines that are each in and of themselves enormous initiatives. And we were talking earlier, I work at a 150-year-old media company. She works at a 100-year-old agricultural-based company. And it's these older companies that have survived century plus that have to be incredibly innovative. And innovation is just part of how you've survived. It's part of your DNA. It's you are an innovative company. And I think that going into starting with Winfield United, I want to dive in a little bit into these businesses to understand them a little more, because I think when people think of farming, you have this sort of vision of this, guy brushing his hand over the fields of corn and getting in his tractor. Some of our marketing
does show that guy, because we're not stupid.
That guy is very fond of that corn, and my husband had a farm and grew up as a farmer, and so this idea is very different from how innovative farmers are today and tech savvy.
You know, it's absolutely true, and I was unaware of that until I moved into Land O'Lakes. As I often say, I don't think because I detasseled corn one summer it makes me an expert about agriculture. It certainly didn't, but I've learned a bunch. And one is that the use of technology is a great enabler for agriculture, as it is for everything. It's the greatest enabler of our time. And big data helps a farmer make better decisions on their land. Not all soil is got the same level of yield. So you shouldn't apply fertilizer on different parts, or you shouldn't have make investment in different crop protection items because it wouldn't pay off, right? Because you want the farmer to be profitable. Here in the United States, we have about 2 million farmers, and technology is a great enabler to growers and producers, but it's an investment that is required to leverage that technology, that big data, that data capture. And at the same time, there is still this, you say, well, the guy in the red barn on the hill and everything, there is still this agronomic expertise that develops over time. And they like our local retailer, our owners, we are a cooperative owned by farmers and local rural retailers, have those agronomists that work and understand the plant science. They may understand the soil science, so that technology is helping understand all of those elements to help improve the decision making of that grower. But yet still they want that touch, that human connection, that person who can sit in their kitchen or in their barn and talk about what has happened the 30 seasons before that. Technology is a great enabler, but of these 2 million farmers, there's been higher commodity prices lately. We all see this in the food supply, but for many years, for the last 3 years before that, prices were very low. People were not making money. In fact, 90+% of those farmers could be considered hobby farmers because they were not making their money on the land. They were making their money to feed themselves and hold their land and their way of life by driving a truck, by being a teacher, by working in town, by doing different things. And so if you think about that number that I'm telling you and saying, geez, 90-some%, can you imagine that? Or dairy producers, really 1 year out of 7 are they profitable, and the rest are not. Why do we have consolidation in agriculture? Why? Because you have to have an ability to offset these lower prices. How do you offset it? By scale and differentiation. And so this movement to scale has been something that is evident in agriculture. Farm sizes get a little bit larger, but I still remind myself, and I would remind all of us, that 95% of these farms are still family-owned. Investment in our communities, in these communities, in technology is absolutely necessary and self-protective for all of us. Less than 1% of the population is involved in agriculture in this country, and they feed all of us. And they feed the world. We are a production concentration area, a breadbasket area in the world. And there would be geopolitical disarray, instability, without an ability to feed your family. And we see this around the world all the time. So, there's a lot here to talk about the advent of technology as an enabler. One other comment on that. In the United States, we are at 1970s level for our investment in ag research. China outspends us 5-1. And I'm not talking about just technology, I'm talking about seed technology, the seeds that are more resistant to drought, to volatility, to pests, et cetera, and applied research, knowledge, investment. So 1970s level. And it must be a priority for us if we're going to resist and deal with climate change in the way that we need to, and also with what is likely to be a much more volatile trade environment for many, many years. So I have concern. It's something I'm in DC a lot. Policy is absolutely critical for agriculture. We should want the farmer to be profitable. It is self-protective of all of us. Food security is national security. We should want investment in technology in our food supply because it will help us be more resilient against this level of volatility we're seeing.
One of a small point I want to underline about why we should all care about the success of Winfield is because not only, like, this was a little bit of an education for me as well, is that every acre of land on the same farm can be very different, have different things. And so the fact that this technology can say, okay, you don't need as much fertilizer on this part, you do, you do need more here, you don't need as much water, instead of this sort of blanket, here's how we grow soybeans.
Right.
It's really customized, which is really saving the farmer and saving natural resources.
That's right, and it's, you know, it's better for the climate. It's better across the board. So that technology use, you know, we use satellite technology. We use all sorts of big data. We have all sorts of different tools and enablers for growers. And then most importantly, we still have our agronomic expertise. We have a number of agronomists, there are thousands across the country, that are in touch with that farm, that they have that farm gate access.
So it's just, again, this sort of very innovative 100-year-old company that's really embracing technology in ways that's really important to all of us. And then Truterra is also just so fascinating. Yeah. Can you give us an overview of how
Well,
that
Truterra
works?
is our, we focus on soil health, we focus on the use of water, et cetera. It's about improved sustainable production. It is about improving decision-making with the grower or with the producer. And so Truterra, again, leverages that data. A broader, how many passes do you make? What kind in your field when you're planting? How many, what kind of equipment do you use, et cetera? We look at the whole model, over 1 trillion data points, and we help a grower understand what programs could they take advantage of, what soil types would imply that they should make a switch in what they're growing, or what the types of seed they're using are. We look at cover crops and the leverage of cover crops as a mechanism. All of those things that help them make a decision that is more profitable and more sustainable. So the Truterra Insight Engine is a technology enabler. We have sustainable agronomists that are working with different growers and different producers to improve, again, their decision-making and their improved profitability.
And so within a little bit more on just the structure of Land O'Lakes, and then I want to go into some of the initiatives. But within Land O'Lakes, you have 20 board members, and your board members are also your owners. And you are able to control, so I mentioned that you had over 19 billion in revenue, and you of that you're using to invest and make sure that the prices are such that the farmers, the owners are getting money, and then the actual profit goes back to the farmers as well.
Yeah, it goes back to the farmers and patronage. So the way we capitalize is we do have debt. I was just with our rating agencies. We're investment grade. We want to remain investment grade. We're not a nonprofit. Got to make some money. But you know, I am privileged because there are times that I might say the enterprise can make more money at a profit level, and that would go back directly as patronage. But it's like a dividend. You wouldn't have the full return. Or there may be times I say, I'm going to keep profit at the farm level. I see dairy producers are having a year where they could make money. They get tax coverage. I know this. I won't get into the tax policy because we'll all have our eyes water. And so I, at times, will make decisions that is across this enterprise. We have 280 manufacturing distribution sites. We have we have a deep research center in animal agriculture outside of St. Louis, where you can see our horses running on the treadmill, literally, and you've got a working farm. I mean, so it's a cool business. It's a lot of fun. But there are times that I make a decision as CEO about where I believe profit pools should be held, or where I want to make sure that I see what's happening in the operating environment, or consolidation is occurring. I want stabilization at farm level on behalf of the member. Now, what's interesting about that is the business is very complex. The financials are very complex. And not everybody agrees, obviously, right? So, part of this is a delicate balancing act of how do I make sure that we are delivering the right return, that we can continue to invest in the business, the staff, the technology, et cetera, and at the same time understand that, in my view, our success starts with our members' success, our shareholders' success. And so, yes, I do have a board of 20. It was 28 when I was named CEO, and it was all men. At the time, now we have 3 or 4 women and everything, but even then I had them right where I wanted them. 28. Me against you guys. I have 4 brothers. I know what I'm doing. And you know what I would say is that many of them have had these farms, these businesses in their family for many years. They may be 4th generation. And the privilege I have is that I am, this role spans from the barn, literally, to the White House. Been with both of the last 2 presidents. And because policy is so critically important. But what a privilege to know their families, to know their ambitions, their hopes for their children, to be with them, to see their resilience, to admire them, and I do. I admire what they do. I admire how strong they are in incredibly complex, difficult, volatile situations that are making our lives better. That we get a safe, affordable food supply. We are unusual to be food self-sufficient in this world. And so I feel such a blessing and a privilege to be with them and to have this construct where I can say, I think we need to make investment here with them, in their communities, in their families, and we spend a lot of time in investing in them and in their rural communities.
I think it's fascinating, and I hope the audience is able to understand a bit of this scope and scale of your world with Land O'Lakes and beyond. One of the things, since I work at a newspaper, that we've been talking more about in the past year than I think ever before is eggs. And the price of eggs as sort of an indicator of what's happening with inflation, with transportation, with cost of goods, sort of all these things. Can you talk about what's going on? How are your farmers experiencing this, and how should we be viewing it?
Well, let me talk about eggs,
please,
because I do know a little bit about that. I've received this question a few times. We used to actually have an egg business. We were primary in it. We're not now. Our brand is used in Eggland's Best, et cetera, but we're part owner of that. What happened there was the avian flu came in, a bird flu, and it destroyed a lot of the laying blocks in the country. And so what you had is a shortage, and that price started to rise, as you would expect. I want to say 40 or 50 million birds died, and then they repopulate, but then they were getting infected too. So sometimes it's seasonal, you can get an infection and everything, but in this instance that didn't occur, so it held on. Thus, you saw an elevation of egg prices. Now, in terms of pricing in general, I use the eggs, but I'm going to say in general. Oftentimes we say the food supply or the food inflation is significant. It is. And that's because, first of all, what folks should understand is only 14 cents on the dollar of what you hit at retail goes to the farmer. So this food value chain, you think about transportation. Now I'm picking up the milk from the farmer. Guess what the cows are milking every day, multiple times a day? Got to have transportation. That milk's got to move off the farm. Well, transportation rates in the last 2 years have gone up more than the last 20 years combined. So think of that hockey stick acceleration. I used a hockey terminology here in Boston.
Good work, good work.
I've got you. But so think of that. So the transportation is up dramatically. Then labor, of course, and I'm talking about at the processors in those facilities. I'm talking about at the retailer. I'm talking about in transportation. And by the way, again, back to transportation, that industry has always had over 100% attrition. And now it's gotten even worse and more challenging. We are looking for those self-driving trucks soon. By the way, I used to sit on the board of Packer, the manufacturer of Peterbilt, Kenworth, and DAF trucks. I was watching that pretty closely, like how quickly is that technology going to come into play? So you've got all of the cost elements. We can't think of it as one thing. Oh, the food is higher. Well, think about all of the expense levels that are across this. Then when we were in the middle of COVID, we had hundreds of ingredient shortages. And we're a scale business, right? We're $20 billion business. There are many small suppliers across this value chain. So hundreds of different ingredients now are short. Now my R&D team is recasting what the ingredient deck should look like. And those small suppliers are having a hard time attracting talent, attracting labor. And what's happened? Well, you're looking at a shortage. You look at early retirements. A lot of folks in the labor pool and the labor market have moved out and have retired. So now it is, employment is like 62.5% versus 65% of the population involved in working and looking for work. So you see this decline in the available labor, and it brings me to one of the key issues that I have, again, continued concern with, and that is immigration reform. And oftentimes when I'm in DC, we're talking about immigration reform, and farm labor. Now, I talk about from laborers, farm labor in general, but I'd say this writ large, that we are short over 2.5 million workers in agriculture. It's not 2.5 million. Millions of acres don't get planted. In the Central Valley of California, produce capital here for the United States, kind of, 20% of the crops don't get harvested because there's no labor. So why do we expect that there's food inflation? Because there's no labor. This is not a political issue. I don't talk politics, I talk policy. Mm-hmm. And we need enabling policy to support not just this industry, but all industries. When I'm on the BRT board of directors, the Business Roundtable board of directors, we talk about these issues all the time. It is about having labor in the country. We have to have more labor in the country. Farm Worker Modernization Act has passed the House twice, and we hoped to get something in the lame duck passed so that it could pass the Senate, but it's just such a topic that folks go really right into the trenches. I want border security. Well, I want border security. Nobody's saying we don't want border security. This would move us along in that regard, but we have to have farm workers. We have to have laborers in the country. So immigration reform is a critical issue for us. It certainly is a critical issue for agriculture. And we think of all the acres that don't get planted, harvests that don't occur, and it leaves us in a much more fragile position.
I think that's an example of how you really need to take a big picture view of so many areas. And one of the things that we've talked a little bit about is with different climate change, is there are things that you're doing to be helpful, and there are things that are also going to dramatically change your business. For example, a lot of the corn that you produce is used for ethanol, mm-hmm. right? And then you're moving towards the electrification of vehicles, right? So there's that going on in the different aspects. So as you talk to us a little bit about what is the future? What are you preparing for?
It's such a good question. We went through a disruptors analysis. We walked our board through this about what would the disruption look like? What are the areas of it? Because there's also new technologies, precision fermentation, that can be used in development of food items. I often get questions, well, what about plant-based? I'm an innovator, I'm fine with innovation. And then what about the use of corn? 25%, I think there's 50 million acres. I'm trying to remember the number of acres that are planted against ethanol. Now that's supportive for farm price and for land price, and supportive for the grower becoming and maintaining profitability. It's also better for our energy supply, and it's more impactful for climate change. So what do we see? Well, we looked at the disruptor analysis. Certainly there's an acceleration of EVs and electric vehicles in the country, but biofuel usage is still increasing, and I think the blend rates, the amount blended into to achieve the targets that are set by the government have increased a bit, and that's favorable for agriculture, certainly for a grower, for corn growers. And same thing for bean growers, and we were talking about this for jet fuel. Those biofuels can be used for jet fuels now as well, so soybean growers, et cetera. This, again, all of these, if you think of the favorable level of impact for, if not just for efficiency, but against climate change and this transition. This is a transition industry. Energy is a transition industry, et cetera. Then we need it, some people get very like, I'm only going to, and you're ruining the environment, et cetera. And what we should understand is we need to transition. We need to make sure we can transition effectively. We should want profitability as this transition occurs. We want the right investments to occur. And so this ethanol, what do we see in the future? Well, we certainly see an acceleration in the amount of and the number of electric vehicles, but I think we're a number of years out from that occurring, and from no use of corn for that. I don't see that in the next, say, 10 years. But you see targets being set. I think California set a target by 2030. A number of countries are setting those kinds of targets. Certainly here in the United States, there are a number of states that are setting those targets. So we certainly see that occurring. The question is what will happen. Now, at the same time, what we should understand is yields will drop. And yields will drop because of water availability, which is a third topic that I prioritize in my conversation. Where is the United States water policy? And I mean this in terms of infrastructure. Usually that's a state-by-state issue. But look what's happening in the Colorado River. Look what's happening on the West Coast. So they talk about the federal policy that's going to come out here about what they're going to do, who's going to get what off the Colorado River. Is it California? Is it Arizona? Is it Colorado? Whatever it is, New Mexico. And I said, well, I want to understand who's involved in the conversation. Yes, it's local communities, but the industries that are at risk are utilities and agriculture, the food supply. Both of these very important. And there have been population growths. But what happens state by state is there's always an argument between the urban areas and the rural areas, and most people don't understand the rural areas, and they say, well, it's not my problem, right? Who's living there? Well, 19% of the population lives in rural America. By the way, they comprise 47% of the military. So we should be investing in our rural communities, in the folks in those communities.
And there are rural communities in all 50 states, including Massachusetts.
And so the issue that the reason there's going to be a yield drop and that we're going to have these issues, and yes, ethanol is one part of it. Will that be a negative? Yes, but at the same time, water availability, what is an investment in water infrastructure? And this can't be a competition. And then what is the framing of the decision on water rights? And why aren't we doing more on desalinization or other mechanisms to deal with our lack of fresh water? And we're not the only place in the world. Actually, the biggest population growth will, of course, occur in Africa, in communities that already are water short and food insecure. These are geopolitical issues that are going to be profound. We saw that with Ukraine. Where did most of the harvest in Ukraine go? To North Africa, the less secure areas of the world. And food insecurity is a problem. Food security is national security. And these investments are necessary. Water policy needs to be part of that. How are we investing on behalf of the United States of our core elements of food, of energy, et cetera, that are protective?
And so this is one of the areas where you're just such a good and important and effective voice for these issues, for these policies, not the politics behind it, but for the policies, and sort of providing a lens on why these are issues that we should all care about. As well. I want to ask probably one or two more questions, and then I'm going to open it up to you guys. But one of the things I found really exciting was the carbon tax credits, which is another, just under your leadership, you've been really pioneering this. You've been partnering with Microsoft. Can you tell us how this works?
Yeah, Microsoft was our first buyer of our carbon credits. So again, our Truterra business works on carbon sequestration and on development with the technology. You can have science-based development of a carbon credit, which is proof that there's been sequestration. There's not as much tilling of the soil, for instance. That's why we see cover crops or things like that, or no-till or partial no-till or things like that. So the question is, per acre, you could say, well, you could get half a ton, say, now of carbon sequestration. And this is an ongoing improvement that you can make. In the upper Midwest, we call that, it's more like 1 ton an acre because we've got the good dirt. That's what we call it. I'm going to give you a farm term. This is a takeaway for you. The good dirt is up in the in the upper Midwest. And so the question is, can we have sequestration, improve the resilience of the farm, and at the same time improve our impact against climate? And so from that, you can get a carbon credit. Now you want to sell that to offset some use or some impact on climate. And certainly Satya, who I had met with, and we talked about this, and we talked about this, and Satya Nadella, for the CEO of Microsoft, and we talked about the use of technology in rural America. By the way, that was the American Connection Project discussion about the note that I had, and certainly 2 or 3 years ago, this is before the pandemic, that there was no technology in rural America, that they were literally driving their kids hours to sit next to a McDonald's to try to get enough bandwidth on their phone to finish their homework. And I said, this is, first of all, unconscionable and unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable. And so we need this technology. Microsoft has partnered with us in our American Connection Project in rural America, where we put up, we use our silos as high ground. We're pushing out technology and available bandwidth to these communities. And I think that is a way that we can have that plus a public-private partnership. We really worked with the Business Roundtable. My chief of staff is here. I see Tina in the background. And Tina, there she is. And she took the lead for our team that made friends with. We have 175 plus partners in companies. We partnered with the Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, because when this COVID crisis started, Tina and I were talking, and I said, this is going to be devastating in rural America. There are no hospitals. Many folks don't have insurance coverage. Many people don't have a car. What are they going to do? And so she got busy talking with the Mayo and Cleveland Clinic. This is before online appointments were really more frequent. And so with that, we got a push towards policy of investment in this infrastructure bill of $65 billion for closing this digital divide. And at the same time, think of the stabilization for these communities and these technologies.
Just one more. What do you want this room, this group of Bostonians, to know or to be thinking more about in terms of the future or issues or policies? What else do you hope we?
I would wish there was more understanding of the fragility of the food supply, of the privilege we have of being in a food secure nation, but that we're one climate issue away from it not being that way. Not just here, but it's already insecure around the world. 700 or 800 million people going to bed hungry. And so this isn't a TV commercial about, can you give a nickel? It's about, there's policy initiatives that we should all recognize. We have problems with available water. We should be pushing for ag research. That is what we need. We should have a water investment policy from the United States. We should want immigration reform. We need labor in the country to make sure that we have food. But we need it across the food supply. We need it in many, many industries. I would wish for all of us to when they're talking to their congressman or their senator or whatever, to recognize that this is not somebody else's problem. This is all of our issue, and we should want this because it's protective for the United States. We are a breadbasket area in the world. We export product around the world. And so it's not just our country, it is a stable political environment around the world that we need to be concerned with. Otherwise, we're going to have wars. We're going to have there are going to be all sorts of climate immigrants that will occur. You already see it coming up from the southern border because they can't feed their families. They were smallholder farmers. They aren't able to do that anymore. And so I'm wishing the takeaway that people will have is we're not just a butter company. That's always good. We make cheese. We have a good pudding business too, Cozy Shack. But But how important these things are, that it's not something that's over here. It's all of our concern. It should be our concern. And there are things you could do to put voice to this with your congressman, with your senator. Where is the immigration reform? We all want border security. We do. I do. Let's move it along and recognize that we have to make an investment. I get the, Beth, this is going to be hard. And I said, we're going to have to do hard things now. Now we have to do the hard things. Otherwise, we're going to have to do the really hard things. And we're going to be very, very unhappy about that.
Well, thank you so much. We are ready to do hard things here, and really thank you for your leadership and your insight here. This has been you have a fascinating job and with a lot of impact that touches a lot of us. So thank you very much for this. Thank you.